Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, it's one of my favorite videos to do, and I don't even care if like 2 people watch this video for the rest of eternity, but I love talking about the books that I read. And in this month, we're not gonna have a lot of books because life. But I do wanna go over the books that I read and then the books that I hope to read next month. In these videos, in case you've never been to one of my book videos before, I don't give any spoilers, but I do give a little bit of a synopsis on what the book is about, and then I talk about my thoughts and the rating that I gave it. I don't have any fancy system for how I rate books. It's really just a gut feeling, like as soon as I close the pages or swipe out of my Kindle, what that book made me feel. And I will say that I am a little tougher on thrillers than I am, say, on like a romance. Before we get into the book content, I have been doing an awful job at like introducing myself in videos. So if you just like randomly clicked on this and you don't know who I am, I'm not like talking at you like we've known each other, you know? So my name is Kate. I am a stay-at-home mom of 3. I have an 18-month-old and twin 7-month-olds. My content normally, actually I can't even say my content normally. I don't really have a niche. I just want to give you what I'm passionate about, what I'm interested in, and then I'm sure there's other people out there interested as well. But generally, hauls is something that I do a lot. So you'll see like grocery hauls, things like that. We do also have annual passes to Disney. So when we do our Disney trips, you'll have a lot of Disney content sprinkled in, and then the books. But anyways, my vibe is really completely unhinged and completely unpolished. So if that's your type of vibe too, please subscribe before you leave, okay? All right, without further ado, let's get into this video. So the first book that I read in the month of July was How to Lose at Love by Sarah Ney. This was a spicy romance, I would call it, and it's I gave it a 2.5 out of 5, and spice factor, I gave it a 2 out of 5. So this book is about Ryan, who just got dumped by her football star boyfriend, but he didn't even have the guts to do it himself. He sent one of his jerky teammates to go break up with her for him, okay? Well, they realize that they have a class together, and the jerky teammate dude realizes that he needs her help in order to pass a class. And so she realizes that he could be the answer to her problems as well. And so they form some type of an alliance to try and tackle their problems together. The spicy scenes in this book were really good. So if you are the type of person who's just looking for spice and you don't care about plot, go for it. For me, I need it to be somewhat even, and I felt like in this book it was completely uneven. The chemistry was really high. I thought the plot was really good, but I just felt like the character development and the story development was just really weak. Okay, the next book that I read was called The German Wife by Kelly Rimmer. This is a historical fiction, and I gave this a 5 out of 5. So this story follows 2 people who are living in Germany, and it's a husband and wife, and the husband is an incredibly talented scientist. And so he's actually recruited by the Nazi Party to work on a rocket program. Both the husband and the wife do not agree with the Nazi Party. However, they've been put in an impossible position where in order to protect their family, they're required to follow along. This book was so good. So this book ends up following, even though it's about the husband and wife that I just talked about, there's a dual point of view happening, but the dual point of view is actually 2 completely different women. One of them is the one that lives in Germany, and one of them actually lives in America. And the 2 women could not have different stories. Their stories are completely different, but the tenacity that they both share in their individual scenarios was incredibly inspiring, and it was amazing to read. This book pulls out all of your emotions. It makes you really sit there and question what you would do in specific scenarios. And, you know, I don't want to give out any spoilers, so it's hard to say more than that, but I think you understand what I'm saying. When it comes to the way that this author brings the stories together, because when you start reading it, you're like, how are these 2 women at all going to be on the same path? But when the story is brought together, it is just phenomenal. This book was solid from start to finish. It was perfectly written. Like, there's not a single critique that I could have about it. If you're a fan of Kristen Hanna, and you liked The 4 Winds and The Nightingale, you would love this book. I felt like it was such an important read because there's so many parallels in today's world that I think people would benefit from reading. And what I loved about this is I feel like the author didn't feel the need to make this a very neat story. It was very messy. It was very complicated. So that just like added to the genuine factor. And it was a beautiful, beautiful book. Okay, so the next book that I read was called Love Sincerely Yours. And this was a dual author book. So it was, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think you get the idea. But it was Sarah Nay, the one that I read the other book from, and Megan Quinn. They wrote this book together, Love Sincerely Yours. This one I gave it a 3 out of 5, and Spice Factor I gave it a 1 out of 5. So it's in that like steamy romance type category. This story follows Peyton, and Peyton has been working for an outdoor adventure company for years. She works in like the marketing department, and she's been there for years, but her boss, the CEO of the company, is a total jerkface and has never noticed her. Well, she decides she's going to resign so she can go out on her own. Well, she goes to the boss to put in her resignation, and he's even more of a jerk. So she ends up in a bad mood. She goes out drinking with her friends, ends up getting a little tipsy, and then sends him an anonymous email through the work server and admits to having a crush on him. So for this one, what I loved about it, I loved the banter and I loved the back and forth. I really enjoyed the characters, but I just felt like it was a little forgettable. That's why this book was a 3 out of 5 for me, because I don't feel like there was anything that really stood out. Megan Quinn, to me, she writes like such laugh out loud moments. So I felt like I felt those in this book, but I just didn't get enough of them. So I don't know if there was just maybe a misconnection between the two writers and their styles just didn't mold together, but I'm not mad I read it. It wasn't a total love for me. This next book, first of all, before I get into this review, I want to let you know that I'm generally not the type of person to put down a book. There's some books that you just don't like, and so I don't want you to walk away from this as me putting down a book, but I, for whatever reason, am like irrationally upset about this book. This book is called Romantic Comedy, and it's by Curtis Sittenfeld. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars and 1 out of 5 for Spice. The reason why I'm irrationally upset about this book is because I have seen it on my Instagram every single day since it released. It's on every single book club that's out there, and I just don't understand why. I feel like it's been completely overhyped, because when I posted my review about how I don't like it, I had so many people DMing me saying that they agree, or that their friend posted the same thing or something. So I don't know what's happening. It feels like some type of a marketing ploy. There's a conspiracy happening. I'm not sure. I'm just kidding about that, by the way. But anyways, this follows Sally, and she's a sketch writer for a late night comedy show. So think like an SNL. She crossed paths with this world famous musician who is appearing on the show as a host. And he comes to her to get some help because her boss lets him know that she's incredibly talented and would be the best person to get him the most potential out of the skit that he comes up with. Okay, so first of all, this book is about nothing. And I think that's what bothers me, is I was sitting there trying to read it and find some type of a plot. But this book is truly about nothing. Again, this is when it comes down to what you prefer to read. And I'm like a high dialogue reader, and I love a heavy plot. So if you're the type of person who just wants to kind of get lost in a book that really is like ordinary and like leading you nowhere, and I don't mean that as an insult, because I understand there's sometimes like a guilty pleasure is great where you just want to read like an everyday story, this would be the book for you. But if you're the type of person who likes a plot and who likes some dialogue and some like, I don't know, drama, this isn't the book for you, because this book is, I walked away not knowing why, okay? I just want to read you one of the lines from the book, and then that maybe will tell you whether or not you'd like this book. And if I was looking at that, would I pick you out from everyone else and say, that's the most gorgeous woman I've ever seen? If I'm being honest, no. That is a line from this book, and it's called Romantic Comedy, okay? I felt like the main character in this book, who's Sally, had such potential, because what a great concept of a book. A female sketch writer for a show like SNL, sign me up. But instead, she ends up just being like whiny and is it deprecating? I think so. Self-deprecating, which, hi, I'm like the queen of that, but it was like way too much. And then the dude, you know, I like the books where she does that and then the dude comes in and like instills confidence in her, but instead he's not doing, I don't know. It was just not for me. Okay, it was just not for me, and I'm just not sure. I want to know in the comments if you read that book what you thought about it, okay? The next book that I read This was called The Davenports. This apparently was a young adult book, and I didn't know that going into it, but it was like a romantic, not comedy, but it's like a historical romance. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, and spice factor is 0 out of 5. There's no spicy scenes, which makes sense now that I know that it's a young adult. So this is set in the 1900s, and it follows the Davenport family, and they're a Black family living in Chicago in the early 1900s, and they have defied all odds. The mother and father have built an empire with their company, and they're now incredibly wealthy. And so what they want for their children is to carry on this legacy. But as they're getting older, they're starting to realize that their heart may be in other places that doesn't align with what their parents want for them. So it ends up following, I want to say, 4 women in this story. 2 of them are the Davenport sisters. One of them is the Davenport maid, and then one of them is the best friend of one of the Davenport sisters. So it's following 4 women, which normally would not be my thing because that's way too many characters to follow along. But I felt like every character was so unique that I didn't get confused when I was bouncing back and forth from points of view. So I really appreciated that. I just felt like the book was beautiful. It was so beautifully written. I was just swept away by the verbiage. I was swept away by the setting. I was swept away by all of it. It was just beautiful. I felt like the characters had such amazing depth to them. I felt like they felt so real. And I felt like the author did such a great job at identifying, I don't want to say like, I guess like privileges in the scenario, and how she would kind of point it out to the different characters and how they've gone through life, but it didn't feel preachy. So it just made you kind of like open your mind a little bit without feeling like you're being talked down to. I don't know. I just felt it was so good. The only reason why it wasn't a 5-star for me was because it just gets a little repetitive at moments, but overall, I just thought it was so good, and I can't wait to read on because it is going to be a series, I think, because it ends on some type of a cliffhanger. So if you're not into like cliffhangers, just know that that's what this book is. Okay, so my next book was called The Way I Hate Him, and this was by one of my favorite authors, Megan Quinn. This one was a 5-star out of 5, okay? Spice factor, 2.5 out of 5. This one is, okay, I have to say this before I get into it. This is one of my least favorite romance tropes, but I say that all the time. I say this, I don't really like this trope unless Megan Quinn writes it, and then I like the trope, okay? So this one follows Hayes, and he's a rock star who just wrapped up a tour, and his grandmother guilt trips him into coming to his hometown of Almond Bay. And when he gets home, there's a woman on his doorstep, and it turns out that she is the recent ex-girlfriend of one of his employees that he found out was stealing from him. She comes back to try and get back at her ex-boyfriend and turn over some of the items that were stolen from him, but he decides to turn it around on her and make her pay for her ex-boyfriend's crimes. I loved the characters. I loved the journey that they go through. I loved the setting. Just think about this. It's a rock star romance, but also has small town charm. You know what I mean? Like, if you're into either of those things, you get both in this book. I felt like there was so much emotion going on. There was a lot of like backstories happening, and I felt like there was a lot of emotion that gets weaved into this book absolutely flawlessly. The general formula for a romantic comedy was not happening here, so for once I was kind of on the edge of my seat for how it was going to go down. Obviously, we know it's going to be a happily ever after, but she really puts you through it before you get there. This book actually releases on August 1st, and I am like excited to say that I was selected to read that book ahead of time. But by the time I post this video, it will be out, and I would recommend reading it. It is free on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have Kindle Unlimited, then I would 100% download this book. Okay, this next one was called Funny Feelings by Tara DeWitt, and I'm very excited to talk about this one. This one I gave a 4.5 out of 5, and for spice I gave it a 1 out of 5. This one follows Farley, and she is an unpolished stand-up comedian who just recently started really hitting her stride to fame. She's approached by her comedy idols and asked to go on tour with them. But in order to do so, they want to bump up her publicity, so they ask her to start fake dating her manager, who she has secretly had feelings for years. This book is what I needed romantic comedy to be. So if you are feeling the same way I felt about romantic comedy, read this one instead. I didn't know what this book was before I went into it. I had read The Co-op by Tara DeWitt earlier in the year and I loved it. So I just picked this up because it was Tara DeWitt. I didn't know what it was about. So the coincidence of me reading this book, like a few books after romantic comedy, is hilarious because I didn't mean to do that. But it felt like a healing moment for me because this is what I was looking for from romantic comedy. The characters were so dynamic and so funny. I was sitting there thinking, like, I cannot imagine being an author having to write a comedian. That must be incredibly scary, especially a stand-up comedian, because you need to have like that oomph of delivery, and you don't get that in a book because there's not like that comedic timing that happens with like the entertainment factor live on stage. But she does such a phenomenal job, and I don't know how. I felt like I was completely immersed into the scenario. I felt the connection through and through, and I completely understood why there was like the angst and the missed opportunity of these two people being together. Like, it's actually believable. There's also a lot of inclusion that happens in this story, and I felt like, just like with the Davenports I was talking about, I hate when it's like preachy. But this one, I feel like it was just weaved into the story so naturally. It just felt beautiful. I also loved Farley so much. I felt like she was just unpolished. And the word that comes to mind for her is that she was just a force. Like, she was just a force. She goes through a lot in her life, but she just came out fighting. And it was a beautiful read. I would 100% recommend this book to you. There's definitely some slower parts in it, but it was just such a good book, and I'm so happy I read it. The next book that I read was The Highland Fling by Megan Quinn again, and this is a romantic comedy as well. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Spice Factor, I just gave it a 1. This one follows Bonnie, who is best friends with Dakota. Both Bonnie and Dakota have had a lot going on with their life, so they decide to go to Scotland together for 6 months based on an ad that they find to run a coffee shop there. Once they get there, the owners are going to be going on a sabbatical, and they have them taking over. Sorry if you can hear thunder in the background. We're about to get an afternoon storm. And the owners tell them, if you need anything, please hit up our son, Rowan, and he'll help you out. So this book starts off a little bit slow, and for whatever reason, I just didn't connect that well with the main character. However, the background characters were awesome. There's kind of like a simultaneous love story that's happening that I really, really digged. The setting was phenomenal. I really, really loved that. And I loved the depth of emotion. There's a lot going on with the family that owns the coffee shop. And I just felt like it was really great how it was handled. And there's also like a little bit of a, like, I love a whole like underdog story and like business rescue type situation. And that's what was happening here. So I really enjoyed that. Okay, so the next one that I read was called Isn't It Romantic by Lyssa Kay Adams. This one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and then I gave a 0.5 out of 5 for Spice. So this one is part of the Bromance Book Club series. This is book number 4 out of 5. I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's more coming because I think there's a couple more dudes in the group. But basically, it's a hilarious concept. There's a group of guys that read steamy historical romance novels, and they use them as manuals to save the issues in their personal love lives. And so this story follows Vlad and Elena. I don't know if it's Elena or Elena, but we're going to go with Elena here. They grew up together in Russia and were very close friends. Their families were close friends. Well, he is a famous hockey player, and he moves to America for the sport. He proposes to Elena so she can come to America as well to get a fresh start and go to school and all that good stuff. So here's the thing. I love this group of dudes. I just think that it's so adorable. This one came off a little preachy to me. And I also loved Vlad in the other stories. So I think that I was far too excited about this one. And then I ended up getting let down, which could be a me problem and not really the book problem. There was also like a mystery happening in the background. And I just felt like I wanted more out of it. So that's it. It just wasn't a love for me, but it's a really cute book. And that entire series is something that I would recommend reading because I just think they're so cute. Okay, so this next book was called The Piece That Fits by N.J. Gray. This one was a spicy romance. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, and Spice Factor, I gave it a 1 out of 5. This one I just read a couple days ago, and I literally just had to read the summary because I could barely remember what it was about, but it was Avery and Liam, and they've been enemies forever, and it was for a good reason. However, he happens to also be best friends with her brother. Well, she breaks up with her boyfriend, and she's going through a really rough time, and she ends up moving in with her brother, who happens to live with his best friend, who is also his bandmate, and they're in a famous they're in a famous rock band together. I really wanted to love this one because I loved another novella that this author wrote. If you want a cute little Christmas in July moment, even though July is about to be over, To Aspen was a really cute Christmas novella that this same person wrote, and I loved it. I, for whatever reason, just could not connect with the characters. If you like some rich people drama, this may be for you, which normally I'm into it, but this time I couldn't get past their whininess and their privilege. I just felt like they had like a sense of entitlement, and it was just rich people problems, and it could have just been a moment in time where I wasn't meant to read this book type thing. I don't know. It just wasn't for me. One thing I did love is that I felt like it was a true enemies to lovers. And I feel like a lot of people do enemies to lovers and they end up being incredibly weak, like the reason why they hate each other. But in this situation, I felt like the enemies to lovers was very strong. So for that, I really enjoyed it. I also loved the plot of this one. There was a lot happening in the background with families, and I just really love how that was explored. I also enjoyed how the author, she slowly reveals pieces of the full story at a time. So it's not like you get it all in the beginning and then it's just kind of repetition towards the end. I felt like it was really explored and worked through in a really good way. But again, it was just the characters is what stopped it for me. I just couldn't get into them. Okay, you guys, I don't know what happened, but one of my reviews didn't end up on GoodReads, and GoodReads is what I refer to. And I cannot believe that I forgot to talk about this book. So just kidding, we have one more we need to talk about. And it's probably the most dramatic one of the month. And I think it was also my favorite. I would say that they're so different books, but The German Wife and this book probably tied for number one for me. This one was Haunting Adeline. And if you're into any Bookstagram or Book Talk type content, you probably have already seen this book making its rounds. It's a dark romance. This one, for rating and spice, I gave a 5 out of 5. So this one follows Adeline, and I hope I'm saying her name right, but whatever, you guys are my friends, it's fine. She moves into her Nana's house after finally processing her grief. It takes her a while to move into the house. She discovers a journal from her great-grandmother and realizes that her great-grandmother had a stalker. She's slowly starting to realize she has a stalker of her own. Listen, this book, I am the type of person that when I was little, when I would watch like kissing scenes in a movie, I would literally cover my eyes. I'm squeamish, I'm ridiculous, I'm a child. This book, however, somehow, even though the spice factor to me was a 5 out of 5, I could not stop reading it. I literally, in my review, and I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but I said if I walked into a church right now, I would combust into flames because I cannot believe that I read that and enjoyed that. This book is completely deranged. It's disturbing. It's a wild ride. And I can't really talk about most of it because it would just be a like huge spoiler. But I will say, if you're sensitive at all, I would look up trigger warnings before proceeding with this book. Here's my thing with this book. The ghost pepper level of spice is insane. But to me, the mystery and thriller that's happening in the background of this was so good. And I was hooked. I didn't want to put this book down. And it actually ends on a cliffhanger, so I have to read the second book. But it was just so good. So the reason why I remembered about this book was because I was going to tell you guys that I've started a few different books that I should be finishing up pretty quick. So I'm reading The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. That one is a fantasy romance, I think. So far, I'm about a quarter in and it's only fantasy. This one's kind of like vampire meets like a Hunger Games situation. I'm enjoying it, but it's a little gory for me. I'm not a fantasy reader, so it's just, I'm a little squeamish. Like I mentioned, I'm a child. So I've been just reading like a couple chapters at a time, and then I go to like, you know, something that I can handle in my ridiculousness. I'm also reading The Boston Girl by Anita Diamant. I don't know if I said her last name right, but that's a historical fiction. I'm probably about a third, maybe even a halfway through that one. That one's really good, but it's not heavy. I don't want to say the word heavy, but my attention span right now is not at its peak. So I'm kind of like just doing that one a little bit at a time. Same thing, a couple chapters. And then I switched to something that's more of like a enjoyable read, like reading for enjoyment and not really for development of myself. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think you know what I'm saying. Other books that I want to read this month, there's some leftovers from last month. So I want to read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I want to read Never Lie by Frida McFadden. Pretend You're Mine by Lucy Score, and Finally Mine by Lucy Score. That's a series. The Maid's Diary by Loreth Ann White. I need to read that next because that's been on my to-read list for months. I have a pile of like physical books that I own that I want to read. So there's a couple in there that I'm probably just going to grab a few of the paperbacks and get through them. But yeah, that's it. That's everything that I read in the month of July and what I hope to read in the month of August. If you guys have any type of book recommendations that you want me to read so you don't have to, and then I can come back and report whether or not I liked it, or just because you care about me and you want me to read great books, please leave them down in the comments. Hey guys, Editing Kate here. That's why I look different than I did in what you were just watching. I'm a genius, and I totally thought that when I recorded that video that you just watched 2 days ago, that it was the end of July. But fun fact, July has 31 days, not 29. And yesterday and today, I was able to actually read 2 more books. So the first book is Kiss and Don't Tell by Megan Quinn, and this is the first book in the Vancouver Agitators series. I've actually already read books 2 and 3. This book I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, and then I gave 1.5 out of 5 for spice. But basically the story follows Winnie, and she just recently within the last year had lost her mom, and she was processing the grief of that. And she decides she wants to reevaluate her life and try to reconnect with her mom, so she runs off to Banff. I never know if I'm saying that right, in Canada, and there's like this freak storm, and she ends up like getting stuck in mud or something like that, and she stumbles on this cabin, and it's filled with professional hockey players. I think there's 5 of them altogether. Well, she happens to have some chemistry with one of them, and he keeps looking at her like she looks really familiar, and he can't figure out why. This book was really, really charming is the word that I would use. This one was heavier on like that butterfly-inducing flirting type of banter happening and lower on like the chemistry type banter. But I just felt like their love story was incredibly genuine, and I really, really enjoyed both of the characters. I also really enjoyed how they each have pretty, I wouldn't say heavy, but they have some deep situations that they're both going through. And I enjoyed how they worked it out on their own. And there was definitely angst and frustration. Anytime you read a Megan Quinn, there's going to be angst and frustration. So that was there. But I felt like the way that they rebuild after the angst and frustration was a little bit more realistic than you read in most romance novels. I will say though, this one took me a long time to sink into. Thankfully, I love Megan Quinn, so I know she's worth it. Just stick it out. But in this book, honestly, most of it, the bulk of it happens in the last 20% of the book. So if you're in this and it's like a little too slow, stick it out because there's like a lot that happens in that last 20%. Okay, the last book that I read in the month of July was called The Boyfriend Candidate, and it's by Ashley Winstead, which I've actually read a thriller by her before called In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, and I really, really liked it. I want to say I gave it like either a 4 or a 4.5 out of 5. It was really well done. This book was completely different. It's a romantic comedy. Basically this follows Alexis, who in her personal life and among her family, she's like the quiet, mousy girl, and she's actually a school librarian. Well, her boyfriend broke up with her because he was cheating on her a year prior, and to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of being dumped, she decides that she wants to mix up her life a little bit, and she's going to do so by having a one-night stand. So she shows up to this fancy hotel bar dressed to the nines, and she meets this really handsome stranger who saves her from having an awkward encounter with an older man. And just as they're about to hook up, the fire alarm for the hotel goes off and they all have to evacuate. Well, he drops her off in an ambulance to make sure that she's okay because she had rolled her ankle during the event, and then all of a sudden just splits, takes off. And she's like baffled because they were having a moment. And she finds out the next day that the reason why he did that is because he's a candidate for governor. And now he needs her to help him repair his reputation because photos have surfaced of their sordid affair. Okay? I would like to know why more people aren't talking about this book. I thought this book was just adorable. It had all of like, if you're into like those Hallmark predictable in a good way, cheesy like cheesy in a good way. And I'm not talking cringy. I'm talking like cheesy, like the butterfly inducing type cheese factor. This is that book. Like this should be a Hallmark movie. It was really, really cute. The plot was genius. The characters were adorable. I loved how they were like, you know, it's a politician and somebody who works in education. Like they have so many differences, but they also had so many commonalities. They found a lot of common ground with one another. And I loved in this one how it was the librarian was teaching the politician, and it wasn't like mansplaining or anything like that. Now, I will say this. There's a lot of discussion of social justice and politics in this book, which shouldn't be a surprise because it's a book about a politician. I feel like the author handles it in a very eloquent way, and I feel like it wasn't preachy. It does lean more on the progressive side, so if that's not your cup of tea, you may not want to dive into this book. If you read for an escape and you don't want to be listening to, or not listening to, but reading current events and the current political climate and things like that, again, this may not be for you because a lot of it was weaved into this book. I personally enjoyed the heck out of it. I thought it was, like I said, I thought it was eloquently handled. I didn't think it was too much. I didn't think it was too preachy. I just think she did a phenomenal job. And I felt like she touched on the subjects in a very universal way. However, it leans progressive, and like I said, if that's not your cup of tea, you may not agree with me on how it was handled. You may think the opposite. So I just want to throw that out there because reading should be enjoyable and it should make you comfortable. And if that topic doesn't make you comfortable, I want to bring it up. Oh, and this one I don't think I mentioned. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And for spice factor, I gave it a 1 out of 5. There was spicy scenes, but nothing crazy. It's a very slow burn. So the spicy scenes don't happen until I think like 75 or 85% into the book. The sister drove me absolutely nuts. And it turns out this is the second book in a 2-part series, which I didn't know. And so now I'm going to go back and read the book. But the sister does something in this book. The sister is also a politician, and she does something in this book that I feel like in real life would have never happened. And of course, there's an entertainment factor when it comes to books. So I take those things with a grain of salt, but the thing she did was annoying enough that it bothered me. What I loved about this book was I had all of the emotions. I laughed, I cried, and mostly I was just cheering on Alexis. She's the school librarian. I was just cheering her on because she was finding her self-confidence. She was finding confidence in her relationships. She was finding confidence in her position at the school. She was really diving into what she wanted to do in the future, and she was thinking outside of the box. She was processing a lot of family emotions. So anyways, that is truly everything because July is officially done. It's now August 1st, and I'm editing this to hopefully get it up sometime tonight. I do have a Bookstagram account, so if you're interested in following me, it is at Kate Chapters, and on there I share my reviews from all of the books that I've read over the past 1.5 years. I usually do probably about 5 reviews a week, and it's a mixture of books that I've finished now and books that I read in the past. But also on there, I include some templates and things like that, so if you want to do book challenges or post your hopefuls or your current reads and stuff like that, I love designing things. So I've made some templates on my Instagram, so you can go on there to share those if you also have a Bookstagram or regular gram, okay? If you also want to follow me just for my everyday life, I have a regular Instagram, which is at Kate Koska. I'll put that up on the screen, and both of them will be linked down below, as well as my GoodReads. And I think that is it. If you guys have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a magical day. Bye.